I'm with Koby Wilbanks, founder of Continuum Legal, and Koby is a fractional general counsel, and today we're going to talk about how that can benefit your business and you as an entrepreneur. So Koby, thanks for joining us, and we're going to jump right in. Do you want to say anything before I ask your first question? Do you want to tell the audience any more about you?
I'm just happy to be here. It's fun to get to talk to you and, get my message out there to more people, and hopefully I can help some more people.
Yeah, well, you have a super interesting business model, at least I think so. So we're going to jump in with kind of the beginnings of this part of your story. So you were a practicing attorney in Texas, about to make partner, and you decided to move to Washington and start your own business. It's like the opposite of what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
So what prompted that?
Well, first, the move to Washington is just, I love nature and everything there is to do with being outdoors, and I felt called to move here and be a part of the community. The fact that there's a great entrepreneurship community here is just an added bonus, but that's fantastic. But as far as why I decided to leave the traditional path that a lot of attorneys take is I just saw a need for a non-traditional model within the legal field. I found traditional law firms are stagnant, slow to change, slow to adapt, continually add less value instead of more value. And I think that's just because of the restrictions placed on attorneys and their traditional role in business. And so I wanted to start my own law firm, providing a more collaborative model focused on customer service and value to the client. And, it's turned out to be a fantastic journey, and Washington is a fantastic place to start that. And I'm very lucky to be here, and it's been fun so far.
Well, we're glad to have you. We won out over Colorado, guys. So that was the two places, right?
That was the two
Us
places.
and Colorado, Washington won the coin toss.
Yeah, I like the rain.
So jumping right to what we talked about as we were setting this up, a lot of owners might not want to call their attorney for fear of being told no, or for fear of incurring massive fees, which really keeps legal kind of at an arm's distance from the business. So, guys, I'm totally reading this, just so everybody is aware. I feel like I should have shortened it down, but we're going to roll with it. How does your model bring legal more into alignment with helping the owner to their end goal?
Great question. So first of all, it's a fractional model, and some people might be familiar with that, like with a fractional CFO or a COO, but it's relatively rare in legal. And it's different from the traditional model because it's more collaborative, more involved in the business. So I understand, the company, the owners, the employees, the goals, the products, everything that I need to know to provide good legal advice. And then sort of what you hinted at is sometimes people are hesitant to talk to their attorney. That's usually because of fees or because they don't like the answer. And so for fees, I worked on that by creating a subscription model. So it's a flat fee every month for communication with the client, so there's no additional charge for calling me. And that incentivizes the client to call me in advance before they do something so that I can be part of the process instead of the answer at the end, which is your second point that you alluded to, which is the Department of No, which I never tell clients no unless it's illegal. But usually my advice is based on practical advice. So, what is the client's risk tolerance? What are their goals? What are they looking to achieve? And then tailoring the advice to them. So the way I sort of describe it is instead of the technically correct answer, it is the practical answer that the client needs. And attorneys are notorious for providing the technically correct answer that provides no real value to the client. And so I'm looking to flip that.
Yeah, which we're going to get to some more on that when we talk about legal ops.
Yes.
But let's focus on the fractional piece right now. So that makes you unique. So there are other unique things, and that's the legal ops part, right? So explain the benefit of fractional, and then if you would, start to explain what does legal ops mean? So we've touched on fractional a little bit, but talk more maybe about the benefit of that, and then jump into legal ops for us.
Yes, some additional benefits on the fractional model other than the pricing is just the customer service focused aspect of the service. It's very much focused on what does the client need and how I can provide it to them, and less I'm sitting here in my ivory castle trying to figure out when will I speak to you, and it'll be Thursday at 2, and sorry if you're not available. So it's very much more of a partnership, a business partnership. And then also there is greater understanding of the business needs. So I focus on the value I provide. So most clients are happy to focus on value instead of time spent, like the hourly billing model.
Yeah.
Because if I take 5 hours and provide you with an answer that does nothing for you, you shouldn't have to pay for 5 hours of time. But if I answer something in 10 minutes that makes a huge impact on your business, I should be compensated more than just for 10 minutes of my time. And so breaking away from that hourly model is good for communication, but it's also good for value to the client.
I feel like somebody listening to this in their car, stuck in traffic, hearing you say that is going to be like, yes.
I hope so. Most people love it, and they see the benefits. And even if they're on the fence about it, I lead them in the direction, and then they start to understand it. Yeah. And then on top of what you mentioned, the legal ops. So legal operations is an emerging field. It's about 10 years old. It's not anything crazy. It's just using, software, automations, processes and procedures, workflows that the business community has used for, more years than I've probably been alive. But finally applying it to legal and legal adjacent departments like HR or the interaction between legal and sales. And it's just using those things to decrease the time spent that the attorney has to spend, empowering the client to control more of the relationship, and then hopefully leading to more consistent results with, less single points of failure, which is usually the attorney as the single point of failure.
Yeah. I'm going to go a little bit off script because that prompted a question for me. I saw somebody post the other day that marketing should report to PR. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, PR should probably report to legal, right? So that prompts the question of where should legal fall in business operations? Because it tends to get avoided. Nobody really wants to talk to legal because legal will shut everything down, going back to the Department of No. Where should legal be at the table?
That's a great question. And different businesses have it situated very differently. Often legal will report to finance, which sometimes makes sense, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes they will be their own department and report directly to the CEO, which is a model that I advocate for, sort of as a chief legal officer. I don't think other business functions should report to legal because I think that might continue the relationship that you've alluded to, that we're here stopping things from happening, and instead I see us as a resource to facilitate the business processes. So I like us being part of all the departments, but slightly to the side so that people feel comfortable iterating within their own departments, being creative, trying to achieve goals, but then looping us in when they need it. So that answers your question with an answer that is to the side.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably would agree with that, and I think probably a lot of attorneys would maybe disagree.
Yes. No, I agree. And legal is important, but so are all the other departments.
Yeah.
And, legal is slightly outside because we deal with confidential information and sensitive information, but at the same time, we need to be integrated into the company. And, there's different structures that make sense for different companies, but that would be my sort of overall answer.
Well, and I love the way you gave that answer because you put an emphasis on allowing other departments to kind of own their swim lane, whereas highly regulated environments tend to become stagnant. Would you agree?
I do agree. Very slow to change, hesitant to expand or explore or be creative. And I understand that. And I'm not going to be the most creative person on your team by a long shot, but I feel like a lot of those types of regulated departments like legal push it to the side and think of change as a bad thing. And there's nothing you can do to stop change. It will happen, and you have to move along with it. And legal needs to as well.
Yeah. Well, and even just industries, for example, I don't get to interview a lot of bankers because they have a lot of regulations.
Yeah, even more than attorneys.
Yeah. And you are the first attorney. Yes, first attorney that I've interviewed. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're maybe the only attorney that I interview because, again, there's this, we can't really talk about that aspect to legal.
And I think a lot of people feel that way. And it might be out of lack of interest or fear of the restrictions that we have on us as licensed professionals. But I think that's the way that legal is going, is legal is going to have to learn to adapt more quickly, be more creative, and address business concerns, not just pure legal concepts.
Yeah. So you're making legal with your fractional model and with your with the emphasis on legal ops, you're making legal more accessible, arguably more useful.
I hope so.
How does it impact bottom line?
Oh, that's a great question. So part of it, I guess we'll talk about substantive legal and then legal operations.
Sure.
So in the collaborative fractional model, impacts bottom line, I can respond faster, provide higher quality advice because I understand the business better. So I'm not providing advice like in a vacuum. I really understand what's going on. And then, I'm looking forward. I'm thinking, because I understand the goals of the company, I'm thinking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. So the answer I give, if we're looking short term, might be different than if we're looking long term. And so higher quality advice that is sits longer as good advice and not having to be changed, and then more responsive advice. And then on legal ops, it is some of the same, but just approaching it in a different way, which is decreasing the time the attorney has to spend and therefore usually decreasing the cost by implementing those workflows. I'm of the opinion that it increases the value of the company because, as with every process, the more repetitive and I guess you could say systematized a department is, the more business can flow through it faster, and therefore the higher value of that department to the company. And then it helps remove, like I mentioned earlier, single points of failure. Yeah. And legal is such a high risk department, and something going wrong can have even company killing consequences. That removing those single points of failure and including the system so everyone understands what their responsibilities are have huge impacts.
Company killing consequences. That's a soundbite.
Yeah.
So what are some examples of those company killing consequences? Not to fearmonger, but I think that none of us knows everything, right? So if I'm running a business and I have a reasonable understanding of legal and legal implications, I might still have some fear around what I don't know with legal. So give some examples of company killing consequences and ways to avoid them.
Sure, of course. So the first one that comes to mind would be employment-related issues. Since employment is such a highly regulated area, we'll pull an example like with I-9 compliance with the federal government. When you hire new employees, there are requirements that you must complete a form. The employee has to provide certain documentation. If you don't do it properly and you get audited by the government, it's thousands of dollars per violation.
I feel like you're making people sweat right now, bringing out the audit word.
Yeah, audit is a dirty word. And I try not to lead with fear, but that is a reality of what I do. Is it's often people come to me from a place of fear, and I hope to turn that around. But that's just the nature of the profession. But that's why it's good to have an attorney that understands the law, but also that works with you proactively. And sometimes it takes a whole team of specialists. And if you're operating in 10 different states, it's hard for one person to keep track of all of that. So you have to have that team around you. And I love working in that kind of environment. Another one will get a little less scary, but still just as important, is let's say your sales process. Legal is often like sales' worst enemy and vice versa. And I think that that's just from a lack of understanding of how they can work together. Right. And creating customer contracts that the sales team understands and legal team understands, bringing in legal at the right moment when needed, not too early, not too late. But if you can't make the sales or you lose out on a big contract, that could kill the company or at least prevent it from growing and achieving the goals that it needs to achieve. And that's a project I always recommend for anyone that deals with either high volume sales or high value sales, where the one sale could make or break the company, is bringing legal in advance to create a system that works well from both sides, both sales and legal.
That's interesting. And what I'm thinking of is, this interoperability, right? Involving legal in more of the decision making. I had a mentor who told me, that for a long time he used legal poorly. And he was then told by an attorney, look, stop asking me what to do. Start telling me what you want to do, and I'll tell you how to do it legally. Right? And, that's even I hesitate with the wording around that because I don't want to make it sound at all like anybody's trying to get away with something or trying to manipulate the system, which I feel is I feel like business gets a bad rap, right? They get blamed for everything from pollution to politics. So, but I think it's an interesting concept that most people don't think of interacting with an attorney that way, right? Like, hey, this is what I want to do. How do I accomplish that? Instead, it usually is asking for advice. So with legal ops and with you being more involved, I guess, proactively in decision making, how does that benefit business?
Well, to touch on what you mentioned, sometimes clients do come to me and they say, I need this specific term or I want to do this specific thing. But I can do what you tell me to do, but you're missing out on like 70% of the value I can provide that way. Because there's understanding the business. There's just me as a sort of straddling the edge of like insider and outsider, seeing what you're doing and providing you with a piece of it, a perspective that isn't pulled into your daily business. I'm in a really good place to both understand what you're doing, but not be so tied into it that I miss other opportunities. And so one would be coming in early, being proactive. You just get more strategic view, right? Like you get someone else to come in and be another set of eyes and ears and provide that advice. And then sometimes things take a really long time to do well. An example of that would be, if you're looking to sell your business and you come to an attorney and you're like, I want to sell my business next month, like you can, but it's going to be painful. It's going to be really expensive and you're not going to get the highest value for your company that you could. So having a team of strategic advisors around you, whoever that may be, to come in and say, you know what, I'm getting to the point where I know I want to exit the business in maybe 5 years or 2 years or even 1 year. And then we can start then and make it as smooth as possible and help you get as much money for the company as possible. And that's something that you can't do if you come in after the fact and just come to an attorney and say, now draft, the asset purchase agreement. You're really limiting your ability to succeed.
Yeah. So you partner well with an organization like us.
Yes.
Where we come in 3 to 5 years before a transition and start prepping them and doing what we can to optimize the business so that it's more appealing to a buyer and then taking them all the way through the transaction process. So you would want to be involved almost at that.
Yeah, just as early as you are.
Just as early as us, right?
Yeah. And it's a perfect partnership. And other than the legal advice, which I don't want to minimize because it's very important, legal ops can really shine in that type of scenario because it lets you use the software that you already have. Like I'm not going to tell you go buy some legal specific software that costs thousands of dollars a year. It's just like Excel and Word and Outlook and maybe a project management tool like Asana or Monday. And just using that to start to build out the structure of legal and the legal adjacent departments. And at the very least, it will make the M&A process smoother. But like I said earlier, I strongly feel that it increases the value of the company.
Yeah. So let's stay there for a moment. Are you doing things like helping draft SOPs?
Yes.
Okay.
I can do that on my own. I can do it, in partnership with the business leaders, or the business leaders can draft it, and I can just review it, with the legal lens. I've done all of those. I draft SOPs for repetitive tasks, like let's say you are growing your company through acquisition and you're buying a lot of companies. I can create M&A workflows that provide that framework that you just drag and drop for each acquisition. And of course, there's changes each time, but it provides that structure and lets the departments understand what their responsibilities are.
So how important is it as you're prepping businesses for M&A? I already know the answer from our side, but how important do you see from a legal perspective having those SOPs be solid before taking a company to market? How much more valuable does it make them?
I think it's very important. As to how much more valuable, there's not a lot of data out there. And that's why I think it's a interesting angle for attorneys to take. And it's something that really sets businesses apart if they're willing to spend some time and effort and resources in this. But let's say, for example, onboarding and offboarding your employees, having that onboarding procedure and understanding that all the offer letters are the same and that the handbook is well written and that people understand their vacation policy. And then the same when you need to terminate an employee, having an SOP that is tied in with IT so that everything is handled seamlessly and you don't have an employee accidentally keeping access to confidential information like that. That I wouldn't say it's a company killing scenario, but it's definitely a wound that the company would have to endure. And so, of course, it increases the value of the company in an M&A transaction.
We see that a lot with owner-founders and family-owned businesses where there's, and this isn't a criticism, I think it's fairly natural, but there's this attitude of, well, this is just how I've always done it. I've been focused on accomplishing my task, not really worried so much about implementing, systems or SOPs or what have you. So when we look to help a business optimize their value, we're oftentimes looking at the business through the lens of a buyer or an investor. And we're saying, what are the things that we see that would cause us to discount our offer or potentially even pass on the opportunity? Now let's take all of those and let's figure out which one's the top priority and prioritize and execute on that list. And by fixing these things, we're going to make this company more turnkey, which in turn is going to be more appealing to a buyer. So can you assist in that process of looking at all those things and creating SOPs around them?
Yes, definitely. And I think of all the departments in a business, legal is the worst at scaling. And oftentimes people don't even think about legal when they do an M&A transaction. It's just like this afterthought that they bring in. And so could definitely help businesses with that, either buying or selling. And I think it's not only important for the scalability and the sellability of the company, but also peace of mind. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of what I do is I take business owners that have sort of negative emotions around legal, and I try to rehabilitate them where they see legal as a benefit and a positive impact. And that's instrumental to anything related to M&A or any of the work that you do.
So, Koby, most businesses need to be spending, $300,000 to $400,000 in legal fees with external law offices before they really consider bringing in. That seems to be about the average. About $500,000, then they'll transition to an in-house counsel. How can you help bridge that gap or provide an alternative to bringing in an in-house counsel?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because that's sort of a specialty area of mine, is building out those legal departments from scratch to help bridge that service gap that I think exists. So first, the more traditional relationship with attorneys and businesses is there's a business owner, maybe they have an attorney they've worked with in the past or a good friend, or they're introduced to a really high quality attorney in a specialty area like tax or immigration or employment law. And then they develop that relationship, they go to that attorney, they go to them for individual projects, like I need a handbook, or I'm about to terminate this one employee and I need your help terminating them. And that model is good, but once you get big enough that you have a lot of moving parts, you're more strategic, you need someone that fills the gaps between those individual projects, right? Ongoing relationship. And that's what's different about my model, is I am not just reactive, I'm very focused on proactive projects and results and the value to the client. And so I get to understand how everything works together and build in sort of those defense barriers and bridge the gap between the individual projects that their specialty attorneys provide. And so it's much more of an ongoing relationship where I talk to most of my clients weekly or monthly instead of, once a quarter or, every time there's a potential lawsuit that's pending.
And it sounds like there's times where you're not necessarily replacing their other attorneys, but you're rather augmenting the legal services that they already have and helping them transition into more of an in-house general counsel role?
Yeah, and that's a great point, which is I'm not here to replace anyone on the team. I think we're all stronger as a collaborative team coming together with our different strengths and weaknesses. And so my role is to be that coordinator to issue spot. Since I am a generalist, unlike many attorneys who specialize in one area, I know when to bring people in. I'm good at the issue spotting, but I'm also good at saying, in a perfect world, you might bring in, European IP licensing counsel, but you don't want to spend that money and this deal isn't worth it. So we'll either do it with your team that you already have or source, a Washington-based, IP attorney to help you. And so that's where I really shine, is bringing that team together and even creating the team if you need those resources.
Can you give us an example of your process, just knowing that trust is such an essential component of what you do? How do you go about building that trust with a new client?
So first, I like to start engagements with some sort of flat fee pricing structure, because that allows the client who, they're new to me and I'm new to them, to feel like they can call me, email me, text me when they need the support, and they don't feel restricted like they have to already have all their thoughts perfectly articulated before they come to me. So that's a big component of it, is that flat fee subscription model. And then on top of that, I just ask a lot of questions. And my whole goal is to understand the entrepreneur, the executive that I'm talking to, and the business. And it's not about me, and eventually I'll get to what I can provide to them. But the first part of the relationship is just understanding what they want, how they want to achieve it, what they're worried about, and then helping guide them along the way. And I say guide because, I have a certain knowledge base that I want to impart to my client. And so, yes, they should never be expected to do all legal work on their own without an attorney. And I'm not advocating for that, but I am advocating for an educated and empowered client that understands what their options are and understands that the advice that I provide is going to be tailored to what they need and not an impediment to their business. And so that's a big component of building that trust, is when a client feels like they can pick up the phone and call me, or say, I think this sounds stupid, but what do you think? Or they know that they don't even have to say any of those things. They can just forward me an email and be like, deal with this. That's when I know I have that level of trust that I strive for in this fractional model.
Awesome. Which leads to another question of, how do you see legal changing in the next decade?
Well, hopefully it's going to change a lot because I think it needs to continue to survive, honestly. Some of the big ones, and this hasn't really hit Washington yet, but one is the non-attorney ownership of law firms. It's slowly coming. It's a difficult thing to balance because as an attorney, I'm a fiduciary, which means I have to put my client's needs before mine. As a non-attorney, you're not restricted by that sort of relationship, and the trust can be eroded if they don't feel like that's there. But the benefit of non-attorney ownership, if it's handled correctly, is the investment dollars that can be funneled into law firms to use technology to help with scaling, to help with beta testing new ways of providing the service. And that's something that attorneys are hesitant to do, but also just don't have the funds to do on a small firm to small firm basis right now. And so I am looking forward to that influx of cash as a way to provide higher quality service and more efficient service to the client. And then tailored to that is just the software that's becoming available for attorneys, both in-house teams and external teams, is really exciting. Tracking the data, time spent per task, who's the bottleneck in a project, where does it get stuck, how can we fix that? Firms are going to have to learn and adopt those softwares, or they're going to be left behind. And then sort of similar to that is AI, which is sort of all the rage to talk about right now.
It's been in like my last 5 interviews.
Yeah. Well, it's important. It's changing the landscape of a lot of professions.
Yeah.
But the way I see it is knowledge workers, everything that's in my head or in anyone else's head, you can find it online. But no one has time to sift through that. And then most people don't have sort of the strategic lens and experience that comes with years and years of practice to understand how, on paper it might say, you should do X, Y, Z, but really, because of my experience, I know just do Z. Like that'll get you where you need to go. And so the attorney is going to be able to use technology and AI to remove some of the repetitive tasks and start to create those sort of knowledge banks for clients and focus solely on strategic advice. And I think that's not unique to attorneys, but to all knowledge workers. But I'm really excited to see that. Creating internal wikis of business and legal knowledge that either the attorney or internal business partners can use to get them maybe 70% of the way there, and then bring in the attorney for the really difficult, complicated cases, or to just look over the last 20%. And just like any other tool, like when the word processor was invented, or like for accountants when Excel was invented, or lots of people were worried that would replace them, and it doesn't. But you must adapt and you must use AI, or you will be replaced by an attorney who will. And so, not to be like in a negative way, I consider that a really positive aspect, because it allows attorneys to focus on more interesting and impactful advice, and it allows the client to get real value from everything the attorney does.
Earlier you mentioned you want legal to be in its own swim lane. You don't necessarily want everyone to need to consult with legal before making a decision, so your aim is to educate and empower. I could see a pushback to that being, well, I don't want this department or that job function making decisions without consulting legal. How do you respond to that?
And that's a great question, and it's a real concern because legal is an important part of the workflow, and it's a highly specialized field, just like any other specialized field. And so I'm not advocating for example, your frontline sales associate signing the contract without consulting legal. But what I do advocate for is a better partnership between legal and the departments they work with, so that they feel comfortable talking to me, but also so that they are educated. We'll go with sales. So the sales department is educated on the consequences, the legal consequences of what they do. And so it's more about a higher quality collaborative relationship where legal is embedded in each department, but is not necessarily above a department. And it's about that collaborative relationship and understanding and education that goes both ways between legal and the other department and back. And so once you create that, and if you add in legal ops, which has like the project management workflow SOPs, then you're creating that second level of protection, because people understand what authority they have and when they have to come back to legal and how to work within those framings. Well,
Koby, thanks so much for being here with us, for sharing kind of your story, your vision for legal in the workplace. As we close, two things that I have for you. Tell people how to contact you, and then could you explain why you picked your name?
Yes, that's a great question. So first, people can contact me at continuum.legal. There's no .com. I get that a lot. And I'd be happy to speak to anyone that is interested in a new way of collaborating with an attorney and needs some advice. And then the name, oh man, I spent weeks of my life trying to come up with that name. And I finally landed on Continuum for two reasons. One, I think legal itself is a continuum. There is no right or wrong place to start or end. And also you must continue to iterate. Like just because we've done something once doesn't mean we leave it and set it and forget it for the next 5 years. You must come back to it, and what you learn along the way obviously influences what you're going to do the next time it comes around.
Right.
And then also I picked Continuum because of the business life cycle, which is lots of times people come to me and they're like, I'm too small to use your services, or they come to me and they're like, well, I already have an attorney. I don't need another one. Right. But business is also on a continuum, and this year you might be really focused on growing and need a certain kind of advice, and next year you might want to sustain, or the next year after that you might decide you want to sell, and you might come all the way back around again and do it all over again. Right. And so I just think it's a great concept that everything is on a continuum. No matter where you start, it's a great place to start. Don't be afraid of just continuing the journey.
No matter where you start, it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
And this is where we end. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.